Welcome to Keystone Cold Cases, a podcast that aims to reignite cold cases across Pennsylvania. We are here to bring attention to the stories that have faded into the background, honoring the victims and their families along the way. Each episode is a step closer to understanding the truth, because every case deserves more than just a passing glance, and every voice deserves to be heard.
Hi, it's Caitlin. I'll be reading Lindsay's case that she researched tonight. As we all know, life gets a little crazy around the holidays. And I'm here with Chelsea and Carrie. How's it going, ladies?
Great. Good. I'm really excited because tonight is Stranger Things.
I've been waiting for this to come out myself, so I'm definitely going to be watching that afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. That's our plan too, to get some food and buckle down and watch.
Yeah. Long awaited. These kids are like so old now. It cracks me up.
I know.
It's so weird.
I was watching the trailer. I'm like, look how old they all look.
Yes, I know. When we look at the old ones, we're like, they were babies. Either way, it's going to be great. I'm excited.
Yes. Well, shout out to two of our Patreon members that have been with us for a while. Heather R. and Lauren G. You guys are the real MVPs. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at KCC Pod and Facebook and YouTube at Keystone Cold Cases. We are releasing current episodes now on YouTube every Friday afternoon, and we are also in the process of releasing older episodes. Don't forget to like or subscribe to all of our social media pages. We love hearing your thoughts on each case, so don't be shy. Drop a comment and send us a message at keystonecoldcases@gmail.com. Or share the episode with a friend who loves true crime as much as you do. Your engagement really helps us grow and reach more listeners. A quick reminder that we do our best to research every case thoroughly and share our sources at kccpod.com. That said, we can't take responsibility for any errors or inaccuracies in the original materials we reference. Today's case is actually a listener suggestion from Facebook. Thanks to Kathy L. for the suggestion. We love hearing from the KCC Pod community and getting case suggestions. If you have a PA case on your mind, reach out. We have an ever-growing list that we are constantly pulling from. Tonight, we're taking a closer look at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and a case that has remained unsolved since Christmas 1986. Most people hear Gettysburg and think of Civil War history, battlefield tours, or maybe even ghost stories. But in 1986, Gettysburg was not just a tourist destination. It was a small, quiet community of just over 7,000 residents. Families lived on classic streets with porches and people knew their neighbors. Kids rode their bikes without much fear, and the older residents generally lived out their retirement in peace. It wasn't the type of place where a homicide, especially a holiday homicide, was expected. Crime rates were low and the police department was small, and in many ways the town felt insulated from the big city problems. By that time, the tourist economy was growing, especially with visitors arriving for Civil War reenactments and walking tours. But away from downtown and the battlefield, streets like York Street were simply neighborhoods. Modest homes, regular routines, and generations of families who knew one another well. If anything unusual happened, word often spread quickly because, unlike big cities, people in Gettysburg tended to look out for each other. That made what happened at 524 York Street even more unsettling. It didn't fit the town's identity. The year was 1986, and nationally it was a complex time. America watched the Challenger space shuttle disaster unfold live on television in January. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster shocked the world in April, and the Iran-Contra scandal was unfolding in Washington. But in Gettysburg, daily life was still slow-moving. On December 25, 1986, local weather records show that conditions were cloudy and chilly with temperatures hovering in the low 40s. No snow, no picturesque Christmas scene, just a quiet town, most people indoors with family. No one near the specific home expected that anything violent had already taken place. The house on York Street belonged to 79-year-old Ivan Oscar Darling. By all accounts, he lived a simple life. He was born in 1907, meaning he had seen nearly every major American historical event of the 20th century. He grew up before television existed. He saw the Great Depression firsthand. He lived through 2 world wars. He saw the invention of space travel and computers, but in his final years, he was simply a widowed man living alone in his modest home on York Street. Ivan had no biological children, but when he married his wife, Eva, whose son was already an adult, Ivan stepped into the role of a father and grandfather. His step-granddaughter, Jennifer Rallo, who spoke about him in a televised news segment, described him as quiet, low-key, and devoted to her grandmother. According to her, he lived a simple life and was consistent in his routines. She also shared a personal detail that paints a clear picture of who he was. He ate Campbell's soup every day just so he could save the labels for his grandson's school fundraiser. His grandson ended up being the top label collector. That little ritual tells you a lot about who Ivan was as a person. He didn't show love loudly. He showed it through routine and reliability.
I think that is just such a sweet act. It's very small, but it means the world for who he's doing it for. It's just cute.
It is. Oh my gosh, I just love that so much.
I know. It's adorable. His wife, Eva, suffered a stroke roughly 4 years before her death and was moved to a nursing home. Ivan reportedly visited her every single day.
Talk about devotion. A man that truly took his vows seriously.
She died about a year before Ivan in 1985, leaving him alone for the first time in decades. People close to him said that life became quieter after she passed, but that he maintained his routines and stayed connected to family as much as he could. Despite being widowed and elderly, he was not isolated.
I think that is one of the most important parts of aging, is staying connected and avoiding isolation. My grandparents practically raised me, and for a few years they helped raise my son as well. And I honestly believe that it kept them young. It gave them purpose, it kept them active, and it made sure that they weren't lonely. But as they got older, I also watched their world shrink. Their friends were passing away, and little by little, they became more isolated too, regardless how much we, tried to give them companionship, if you know what I mean.
Right, right. In my mind, I'm just picturing this little man, like the one from the Disney movie Up. Like he loved his wife, and he just stuck to his routines and didn't bother anyone.
I love that movie.
That's a really good comparison. That is absolutely true.
Right, so you're picturing the same, right?
Yeah.
On Christmas Day in 1986, Ivan's stepson, Earl Merrick, was on his way from Mount Airy, Maryland, to visit family. Ivan's house was meant to be a quick stop before they continued on to see more relatives. Around 8:30 a.m., Earl arrived at the small home, and that's when he discovered Ivan, deceased, inside.
Now, I just want to point out that all of the news articles said that, had that version. But a couple years ago, there was a news reporter asking the family questions, and the step-granddaughter said that they were calling a neighbor because they couldn't get in touch with him, and they actually asked a neighbor to go across the street. They were all supposed to meet and go to, I guess, an all-you-can-eat type buffet for Christmas dinner. They couldn't get a hold of him at that time. Even though he's older, he was still able to drive, and neighbors stopped by, and that's when they discovered him. So there's two different stories. I'm not sure if there just wasn't a lot of news coverage in the beginning, and that's why it didn't come out. So just want to point it out there. We have everything sourced.
He immediately called the police, and Ivan was pronounced dead at the scene. His body was taken to Lehigh Valley Hospital in Allentown for an autopsy. The Adams County coroner ruled the death a homicide. The autopsy reported that the cause of death was massive hemorrhaging from numerous puncture wounds. This suggested multiple stab wounds, likely a knife, as the weapon. However, it was never confirmed or identified what the murder weapon could have been.
I saw in an article the reason they couldn't identify the weapon was because he was so poorly decomposed by the time that he was found. So I'm guessing I don't know, the serration or certain indicators kind of vanish as time goes on when a body's sitting. That's what I'm assuming.
Right.
Yeah, so they probably knew he was stabbed, but they couldn't tell exactly what it had been that was used. It
Right.
sounds like.
I find it kind of odd that they said puncture wounds. I don't know. In my mind, I'm thinking something much smaller than a knife, but I guess, like you said, because of the decomp, they couldn't really tell. But they were able to tell this was just not a natural passing.
The autopsy also revealed something critical. Ivan had likely died several days earlier, possibly between December 21st and 22nd, meaning he had been deceased inside his home for days before being found.
It really makes you wonder. If he was such a man of habit, how did no one notice something was off? The neighbor seemed friendly enough, especially, if we're going with a story from the step-granddaughter that they had the neighbor's phone numbers. You'd think someone might have picked up on a change of his routine. And now, remember, this is not just Gettysburg, it's Gettysburg Borough that this happened. So the houses are pretty close together. Mm-hmm. You'd think someone might have picked up on a change in his routine, but it was around the holidays. Everyone's schedules were probably all over the place. Kids off school, people traveling, holiday activity stacking up. It's easy for little signs to slip through the cracks that time of the year.
Right. All really good points. Maybe they just assumed everything was okay since things were just quiet.
Yeah, I agree. I know during the holidays, I probably wouldn't notice anything because there's just so much going on in my head that I'm worried about getting presents and wrapping, gifts and all that. I probably wouldn't notice things that were out of the ordinary, to be honest.
Especially if it was small. It wasn't glaringly that there was something really, really wrong.
Yeah. So investigators have never publicly disclosed the exact location where Ivan was found or how his body was positioned. They have left out a lot about the description of the crime scene. This is actually common in unsolved homicide cases, as some details are intentionally withheld so that if someone confesses, law enforcement can verify whether they actually know details only the killer would know. It is also believed that the home was not ransacked, suggesting a targeted and deliberate act rather than a chaotic or panicked robbery.
Yeah, for me, when I hear about an elderly person murdered in their own home, I feel like it's usually someone they know, possibly a family member, motivated by greed, taking advantage of someone older and most likely less able to fend off, a confrontation. And, maybe they were just looking for that easy target, easy money. That's just where my mind goes.
Yep, same. Investigators immediately considered a robbery as a possible motive. Personal items and cash were reported missing, specifically a wristwatch, a cigar box, and a pre-post-World War II coins that Ivan reportedly collected. But another piece of evidence complicated things. Police found no signs of forced entry. That raised an important question. Did Ivan willingly let someone in? Investigators also considered the possibility that he knew his killer. Some investigators reportedly believed strongly that this was not the work of a stranger. The idea is consistent with the absence of visible forced entry. Investigators also noted that Ivan was extremely predictable in his daily habits. In cases involving elderly victims, criminals will sometimes exploit routines such as knowing when they are home, when they leave, and when the family is least likely to check on them. Someone familiar with his patterns may have known the best time to approach his house, especially in the days before Christmas when people are distracted by holiday plans.
I don't know. To me, he seems like he's just the sweetest old man. I feel like he would open the door for anyone, but I do think it's important. I read an article in the Gettysburg Times that said one of Ivan's neighbors mentioned his recent concerns regarding his vision. I mean, we know he's not a spring chicken. As we get older, things start to decline. Ivan was worrying about losing his license, his driving license, due to this new medical problem that he figured it was a medical problem. I don't know. I don't know what it was, but he was having vision issues. And before he passed, he had an eye examination scheduled, obviously that he didn't make it to. And I can't help wonder if this played a role in accidentally letting someone into his home. Like, we don't know how bad his vision was, but to be worried that you're going to have your license taken,
Right.
it was probably pretty bad.
Yeah, that definitely could have been a possibility. But also, since he was so predictable, if someone had been watching his daily routines, they could have been very calculated in their attack. So I joke with my husband all the time. He is so incredibly predictable. And like, this just makes you an easy target. I mean, he's almost like to the minute on things. And I'm all over the place. Like, no one would be able to predict my next move because I don't even know what I'm going to do most of the time. But that predictability can definitely make you more of a target in some ways, I would think.
But if someone was truly watching him and they knew his routine, wouldn't they know when he wasn't there to, I guess, pounce on that opportunity versus
True.
trying to do a burglary while he is there?
Right. That's a really, really good point.
And also, like, back then, this was before, like, cell phones were big. Anybody could have knocked on his door and been like, hey, man, can I use your phone?
Right.
Then that wouldn't be, like, a weird thing. You know what I mean? In my opinion, I feel like somebody back then would be like, yeah, sure, come use my phone.
Yeah,
So.
that actually happened to me in the 80s. And my mom was driving us kids and our car broke down. And in the 80s, we didn't have a cell phone and we were not in walking distance from home. And yeah, we just walked up to what looked like hopefully a friendly house and asked them if we could use their phone. Because that's just kind of what you did if you weren't near like a gas station or anything. So definitely.
Yep.
Crime of opportunity maybe here.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me.
Mm-hmm.
There was also history at this address. According to the family, Ivan's home was broken into 2 years earlier in 1984, when cash and personal papers were stolen. Whether that burglary was connected to the 1986 murder remains unknown, but investigators have acknowledged that this earlier incident is part of the case record. If someone had targeted him before, did they return perhaps, believing Ivan kept money in the home? Or did word spread locally that he was vulnerable and lived alone? These are open questions with no publicly known answers.
Though the original burglary, it was in 1984. Nope, forget that, because his wife was in a nursing home, wasn't she? So he would have been alone during that time. Okay, scratch that. I read in an article in the Gettysburg Times that residents of York Street had noticed in the prior months to Ivan's death that damage was happening along automobiles parked in the alleyways. And according to these residents, York Street was once a very safe and sought after area, but to them, it was slowly turning into a darker corner.
It makes me wonder if it was like damage from somebody driving down and accidentally hitting the cars, or like intentionally like hitting them or something. Because I feel like that would make a huge difference.
Resident said that it wasn't just like a one-time thing, it was constantly occurring.
Yeah, that's weird. Another challenge was how much time had passed before police arrived. With several days between the estimated time of death and discovery, weather conditions, Heating and environmental factors could have rapidly destroyed or degraded trace evidence. In colder homes, blood dries and congeals, fabrics stiffen, odors fade, even fingerprints can disappear from certain surfaces in as little as 12 to 24 hours. That likely made it harder to establish a clear timeline. Warmer indoor temperatures can speed up the decomposition process, which makes it harder for medical examiners to pinpoint an exact time of death. Heat also causes blood to dry more quickly and can accelerate the breakdown of trace evidence such as skin cells, fibers, or fingerprints. In homicide cases, where several days pass before a body is found, a warm environment can limit how much forensic information investigators are able to recover. Now let's talk about how a case like this would have been investigated in 1986. DNA testing, as we know it today, did not exist yet. There were no national DNA databases. Fingerprints were still stored on physical cards. Security cameras were uncommon in residential areas. Databases for comparing suspects were limited. And small-town police departments did not have access to specialized forensic tools the way larger agencies did. The Gettysburg Borough Police Department was much smaller during this time period. They did investigate the crime, but within the limitations of the era. It isn't clear what type of forensic evidence was collected at the time, but we do know that no suspect was ever publicly named and the murder weapon was never recovered. In cases like this, especially in the 1980s, much of the investigation relied heavily on interviews and memory. But memories fade. People move away. Witnesses die. Cold cases are not only about evidence surviving, they're about people surviving. The longer time goes on, the harder it becomes to reconstruct an accurate picture, especially without modern surveillance or digital records that we rely on today. That means that a significant part of the investigation likely depended on interviews, tips, neighbor recollections, and patterns of behavior. In larger cities with active crime labs, trace evidence might have been better preserved, but small towns didn't always preserve evidence using today's standards, so we simply don't know how the evidence was stored or what condition it's in. The case eventually went cold. Officially, it remained open. The active investigation slowed over the years, as investigators retired and witnesses aged. Time is the enemy of cold cases.
Do we know if they specifically investigated any family members, friends, or neighbors? Ladies know.
I'm not sure.
When I was looking at the articles, it didn't specifically say.
Mm-hmm.
Mind you, over the course of almost, what is it, like almost 4 decades at this point, right? There were only a handful of articles, less than 12.
Wow.
Which is amazing. It just wasn't as publicized as I feel like articles are today. And mind you, he didn't have a ton of family.
Right.
His wife passed away. He didn't have biological children.
Exactly.
So you don't have those people pushing and advocating for the news to get out there.
Very
it didn't
true.
specifically say
Mm-hmm.
if they asked the neighbors like specific case questions, but they clearly talked to neighbors. We know the one neighbor mentioned about his vision.
Mm-hmm.
His step-granddaughter mentioned that they called a neighbor to check on him. I'm sure if he found the body, they were talked to.
Mm-hmm.
If we are believing the articles from like the time and they said the stepson found him, I'm sure they talked to him. I am highly sure that they talked to people.
Yeah, I'm sure they talked to him. I just didn't know if they like really fully investigated, you know.
Well, I was going to mention it a little bit later,
Oh, okay.
but this case file, quote unquote, wasn't anymore like a manila file folder anymore. They put so much time and effort into it for being such a small police department at Gettysburg Borough that they actually had a box for it. And I mean,
Nice.
maybe to us that doesn't sound big,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm sure they exhausted a lot of resources working on that. It definitely doesn't seem like they kind of closed the case and moved on.
That's good to know.
So there is a psychological angle at play too. Cold case investigators often consider whether guilt itself changes with time. As people age, they may feel more pressure to confess, or family members may reveal information that was once too dangerous to speak about. Law enforcement in this case has continued to stress that even a small detail, such as a phrase someone overheard or an unexplained item someone once had, could still be enough to break the case. But the story is not over. In June 2022, the Adams County District Attorney's Office made a public announcement. They were reopening the investigation into the murder of Ivan Darling.
Which I think is absolutely amazing, considering, like we already talked about, he doesn't have family around that are advocating to move this forward. So this means that the police department is trying to get justice for him on their own, which is great, because sometimes we don't see that.
Right.
We have had instances of families reaching out to us, like, a generation later, and they're trying to get closure for their family, and the police don't even want to talk to us, won't give us anything, or won't even talk to them. So I think it is great that they decided to open this up.
One thing that just keeps replaying in my mind as I keep reading this, I wonder if before his wife died, if she had a caretaker, or if he had some kind of caretaker that would come over and help them, because the things that were stolen seem like specific things.
Yes.
That somebody would have to have been there to know about, like coins. I mean, I guess you could go ransacking the house, but usually those things are kept in certain areas or hidden away, or
right.
So,
that's a really good point. And they said the house was not ransacked, so yeah, that's
yeah,
a really good point.
It wasn't like they ripped the house apart. It was they already knew that these things were there and went specifically for them. So the thing that keeps, I guess, replaying in my head was, before his wife died, did she have some caretaker come and stay at the house, or did he have somebody come help him, or something of that nature? That's what
cleaning
pops
person
in my head.
Yeah, anyone.
Or a cleaning person, or something along the lines of somebody who would be there to help them.
Right.
As news release explained, that investigation would re-examine the evidence using modern forensic technology that wasn't available in 1986. Authorities believe that technology could break the case wide open. They also said they would re-interview former investigators, review case histories, and follow any new leads. The reopening involved local police, the Pennsylvania State Police, and the FBI, indicating that serious resources were being used.
And I want to go back to Carrie's question. This case did have very little media coverage, and even with them reopening it, it's not a lot of coverage. 2 local newspapers picked it up. They did a local segment on it on the news that lasted a minute and a half. But the investigators really did put their time in it. We talked about that they now moved it from a folder to a box. The authorities said that they poured time and effort into seeking justice. Every credible lead, and sometimes even the questionable ones that they got, because let's be honest, I feel like every case gets ridiculous people calling in because they want to be a part of it, or they want to lead the authorities astray. They were followed up on. And even years after his death, tips did continue to come in showing that the case was far from forgotten. So it's nice that they are going to refocus their efforts and try to bring closure.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that sounds like they're putting a lot of effort into figuring this out, which is really nice of them. Modern cold case units also use advanced databases, not just for fingerprints or DNA, but for connecting names across prior arrests, property records, financial histories, and even genealogy databases. Someone who was invisible in 1986 might be traceable through digital records today. We do not have public details about what physical evidence still exists, but even small samples were preserved properly Things like touch DNA, bloodstain analysis, and modern fingerprint comparison could reveal information that wasn't possible then. The reopening also encourages witnesses or people who heard rumors to come forward. Cold case work often involves someone remembering something decades later or finally feeling safe enough to talk. For now, the investigation remains active, but no arrests have been announced.
And we also have to remember that when authorities do work on cold cases, time moves slower. They have active cases that are not stopping just for them to refocus, and they have to prioritize, and they also have limited resources to even devote to older ones. Lab work often falls to the bottom of the list, but who knows, maybe sooner rather than later, we'll start getting some answers.
Yeah, also money should be a consideration, as I know that private labs are very expensive, and the police department might not always have had those sufficient funds. I think that when they send them out to these private labs, sometimes they have better results, but they cost a lot more.
Well, the thing that's frustrating for me, and it doesn't pertain to this case at all, but we covered a case. It was Suitcase Jane Doe. I think the first episode in November. That was a regular episode. A handful of people want to send the DNA to some place like Othram or Othram, however you say it. And basically, they've been solving like a ton of Jane and John Doe cases. And so many people reached out to the police department. And even though they said that they'd be willing to kind of do like community raising, I guess that's the best word for it, because it's about $8,000 for the testing.
It's expensive.
The police department wouldn't even hear about it or even take the suggestion, which is really, really frustrating. And so, like, you never really know. I feel like more people in the community would be more than welcome to band together, raise money for certain tests if the police would kind of put it out there and be like, hey, we need help. Guaranteed.
I agree.
It's funny that this is actually brought up because I was just watching a documentary on Hulu the other night about the Bakersfield 3, which is like a crazy story where like 3 different people died and then their moms got together and kind of figured out that they were all connected, like they all knew each other. So at one point a body part washed up on shore and they were all anxiously waiting to like see whose kid it was because they had all lost their child, but the DNA testing, it was like a year and they still haven't been able to test it. So they got together and like raised all this money to like help the police department like move things along. And then one of the ladies actually was watching a program about wildfires and that the DNA company was offering to retest the DNA and of the people who were in the fire. Like there was like wildfires and the DNA company was offering to, identify the people by DNA testing. So one of the mothers reached out to that company and I think they were the ones who ended up doing the testing for them. But they did the same thing, like banded together to raise money to be able to test the DNA and find out whose body part it was that washed up. But to think like, a body has washed up and you're just sitting there waiting for a year to get an answer of like whose it is because they can't get the DNA test done, which is like crazy to me.
Yeah.
This brings us to the larger questions. What does justice look like nearly 40 years later? Families often say that closure itself matters, regardless of legal consequence. Naming a person, even delayed, can help restore dignity to a victim's story. There's also the community angle to consider. Gettysburg is a place known for history, and this murder is recent enough that local residents might still remember. There's a chance that someone knows something small, like a comment made years later in a bar, or an odd conversation, or belonging someone shouldn't have had. That could still matter. That's why authorities have renewed appeals for tips. They believe this case can be solved, and if it's solved, it would tell us more than who was guilty. It would tell us that time doesn't erase truth. So tonight, we remember not just the crime, but Ivan himself, a quiet man devoted to his wife, faithful in routine, who saved soup labels for his grandson's fundraiser. A man who was meant to spend Christmas at a buffet dinner, but never got the chance. He became a cold case, but he was never forgotten by his family, and now investigators are hoping someone or something in the evidence will speak. If you're listening and lived in Gettysburg in the 1980s, or knew Ivan, or heard something, even something small, there is still time to tell law enforcement. The investigation remains open, and even a small memory could still matter. That's what cold case detectives remind us. Time closes some doors, but it can also open others. So where does justice live? Maybe in the evidence, maybe in someone's memory, or maybe in never letting Ivan's name disappear. That's why we told his story, and that's why his case is still open. Anyone with information related to this case is encouraged to contact Detective Chris Evans, Gettysburg Police Department, 717-334-1168, or Detective Tim Geis, Adams County Detectives, at 717-337-9840, extension 1153, or via Adams County Crime Stoppers at 717-334-8057.
That's all we have for this episode of the Keystone Cold Cases podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and please consider leaving us a review wherever you get your podcasts. If you want to find out more about the podcast, the hosts, and the cases we cover, or if you want to suggest a case, please visit us at kccpod.com or send us an email at keystonecoldcases@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook at Keystone Cold Cases and on Instagram and TikTok at KCCPod. Follow us on YouTube at Keystone Cold Cases, and please remember never to reach out to the family or friends of the victims, only to law enforcement if you have any tips. This episode was researched and hosted by me, Lindsay, and you can find all of our sources, social information, and contact information at KCCPod. Theme music by Darren Meekins and production assistance from Shannon Bickle. Join us again next week for another case to sleuth out.